Project Binky in colour. Starring Nick Blackhurst. Also starring Richard Brunning. And Rex Hamilton as Abraham Lincoln. Tonight's episode, A Fabrication Nation. Project Binky is filmed in front of a live studio audience. Well, it's filmed in front of Ralph. Coming up in episode 5, Nick starts using dressmaking terms.
We need a big gusset.
I begin to suspect that the long days in the workshop are taking their toll on Nick's sanity.
It's the voices in my head. They make me do things.
And we find out that Nick has a lovely bunch of coconuts.
Now that I've got what have I got? A lovely bunch of coconuts. A lovely bunch of coconuts.
So since you were last with us, we've cleaned back the seat boxes, removed the engine, gearbox and all the suspension, and now moving forward, the next job is to begin the mammoth task of building the front bulkhead. So we'll start with the steering rack mount. To fix the rack mount, we need to get rid of all this temporary bracing. And to do that, we need to add some more temporary bracing. The rack mount is currently supported from the back side, but that's where the bulkhead needs to be. So we've quickly knocked up a jig so we can support it from the front. This will allow us to cut out all the temporary bracing and clear the way for the lower part of the new bulkhead. That lot has done its job now. It'll be recycled into a steel sculpture immortalising the power of Binky once the project's complete. Well, either that or it'll get weighed in for scrap like the rest of it.
As you can probably imagine, I'm fairly keen that once installed, this steering rack mount isn't free to move around. So to ensure that, it's going to get welded directly to this bit of 3mm thick box section that fits right up behind it.
3mm thick does seem a bit excessive, I have to say.
3mm thick might seem a little bit over the top, and it possibly is, but this one piece of box section is the key to sorting this whole area out. Not only is it supporting the steering rack, it's also keeping the chassis rails apart. I'm going to use it to build bottom arm mounts up to it and keep those into place. The tunnel's going to come into the back of it, and I'm going to build the main bulkhead down to it. Best get it welded in then. This box section is doing a great job of holding the chassis rails apart, but there's still nothing keeping them vertical. For that, we need a big gusset. There's no real need for this link. I just wanted to legitimately say big gusset on camera.
Gusset. There. I've said it too. Can we move on now? Get on with fitting the aforementioned piece. They do look like nice gussets, I'll be honest.
That lot's all very well and good, but as it stands at the moment, there's still nothing permanently attaching the chassis rails to the chassis of the car, so that's the next area to sort.
These pieces will form an infill between the A-post and the chassis rail. Then we'll strengthen the whole thing up with some more steel. Right, you lot know how it works. CAD template, cut out the steel, and then bend it into shape. These plates are 2mm thick and will add some much needed strength in this really critical area. When dealing with the kind of forces we're expecting, it's much better to be on the safe side and add as much strength as we reasonably can despite adding the weight. Okay, so let's tie in the bottom arm mounts properly. This template is a tad more complex, and as ever there's 2 of them. So recreate in the sheet steel, and then weld them into position. Looking good. Great, so now let's cover that captive bolt and webbing in the bottom arm mount using a fairly simple little plate. Now that the gussets, infills and covers are in place, we've ground it all back and primed it to stop it rusting. It looks pretty damn good to me. We're now in a position to be able to remove some more of the bracing. So out comes the grinder. And the hammer. So now the bracing is gone, we can finish the front of the floor and the tunnel up to the new lower bulkhead.
The design of this whole area is going to be dictated by the AntiRoll Bar, so I need to fit that so I can build round it. Trouble is, in its standard position, if you remember back, it fouls the drive shaft. So the first job is to cut and extend the AntiRoll Bar mounting bracket by about 15mm.
Reusing some of our redundant jig parts, we've whipped up a little stand to make sure everything stays square. We can then cut off the end of the anti-roll bar bracket, move the stand back 15mm, and place in position the extension piece. So now just weld the extension in, linish it back and spray it, and there you have one anti-roll bar bracket lengthened by 15mm so we can clear the drive shafts. We'll just bolt them back into place now, and then the anti-roll bar and bottom arms can go back in.
So the anti-roll bar is now back in the car in its new location 15mm further back, which means we've got plenty of room for the drive shaft. The trade-off for missing the drive shaft is we've had to lose a bit more floor, and unfortunately now the anti-roll bar itself is hitting the bottom arm mount. That's not as dire as it sounds because I've managed to get the bulkhead much further forward in the car than I was expecting, so a lot of this can go anyway.
A few minor adjustments with a grinder, a welder and a hammer, and we've got the clearance we need.
We've now got plenty of clearance for the anti-roll bar, but I've come across a bit of a flaw in the design. Here it is. Goes in here.
He thinks he's funny, doesn't he? Well, he is quite funny, but we shouldn't encourage it. It's more work to overlap this new plate underneath the main floor, but it's worth it, as the original Mini had it the other way round, and water seeped in through this seam and into the cabin, soaking the carpets. This work should keep it watertight. After welding in the floor plates, we've extended the chassis legs down under the floor. Then we've blanked off the hole. On the inside there's another gap that needs filling with a little infill plate. And now there's just the small problem of a little gap in the middle. Let's see if we can fill that up. This looks like it might just do the trick. We'll get this clamped into place and then plug welded in from the back. There's a lot of welding in there, and the lower bulkhead is beginning to take shape. So that plate is in properly now, so we can refit the anti-roll bar and then start on the next problem.
Now the lower bulkhead's in, the next challenge is to get the tunnel to meet up with it. And that means going over the anti-roll bar. This is going to need some cardboard and some serious thought.
Yay, it's tea time. Sorry, thinking time. We've clamped a bit of angle to the lower bulkhead at the height where we want the top of the tunnel to come. It has to be level too, obviously. Make the noise!
The anti-roll bar obviously moves backwards and forwards as the suspension goes up and down. So I've got this set at a sort of a best guess full compression, so we don't have any clearance issues.
It's time to break out the cardboard now, and this is a fairly complex little shape to recreate in steel.
Now that the template's fitting nicely, the next step is to turn that into steel. And I suppose any sensible person would just make a vertical drop plate to fill in the gap.
I think we're all painfully aware that Nick and the word sensible are mutually exclusive. So out comes the grinder to cut slots in the tunnel in order to allow us to fold up some flaps for the tunnel extension to come down to. There's the CAD template unfolded flat. And here's the finished metal piece. Good stuff. Clamp it in, weld it in, then finish it off. Job's a good one.
The next job is the main front bulkhead panel, and that means motor back in and quite possibly the mother of all cardboard templates. It also means this last bit of original bulkhead has to go. The trouble with that is, some months ago I left this like this for a very good reason. I'm just buggered if I can remember what that reason was.
Despite racking our brains over another cup of tea, we can't remember why he left it in, so we thought sod it and cut it out. For the umpteenth time, in goes the engine again. Sadly, the bulkhead can't be a flat piece of steel. It's got to clear the inlet manifold, and that'll make it reasonably tricky.
So building a bulkhead, where do you start? Well, it sounds obvious, but step one is know what you want to end up with. And what I want is a tidy looking bulkhead, follows the line of the lower bulkhead section we've already made, and comes up as high as this box section here. And I don't want it to look like a patchwork quilt. Step two, set up a datum.
This piece of angle will act as a level, so we can make a template of the profile.
Step three, make a template of the profile you need.
See, told you. I'm good at this. It's almost like I've seen this whole thing before. Many times.
This is where having filthy fingers helps.
After fixing the card in place and drawn on the clearance needed, we can cut out the shape.
Now that I've got a template of the shape the bulkhead needs to be, step 4 is to use it to make a temporary support to build the top edge to.
We've whipped up the temporary support out of angle iron, and that'll be clamped into the car and then tacked in, so as Nick says, the top edge of the bulkhead can be built up to this level. Now with a bit of luck, this will be the last time the engine needs to come out for a while. Now that the temporary support is in, we can start the main bulkhead piece. But first, step 5, have a cup of tea.
Step 6 is to go Blue Peter on it.
Well, we promised you the mother of all cardboard templates and never want to renege on a promise. This is it. It's a work of art. Nick will have his work cut out to recreate this pattern in one piece of steel, but he likes a challenge. It's a good job really, because this whole project's a monster.
Step 7, turn the cardboard template into steel.
The first job is to mark out the steel very carefully from the template using a blue permanent marker. Or green. Or red works too, to be honest as well. Then equally as carefully, cut out the steel using a grinder. You end up with an exact copy of the template. Then you bend it into shape to end up with this. A bulkhead. And now the moment of truth. Does it fit? Well, I hope so, else this whole last few minutes was for nothing. Yay! Does it ever fit? That's awesome!
Step 8, weld it in.
If he takes his shoes and socks off, Nick can count to 23.
And lastly, the most important, step 9. Cheers, Mom.
After that quick brew, we've finished off the rack mount and filled in and ground back the slots in the upper return.
All I need now then to finish this off is a quick rust repair on the dash rail, and then a panel to go from here to here. Just like this one.
Right, let's get it clamped in and welded up. We've plug welded every other hole along the top, so when the new scuttle panel goes in, we can weld all 3 pieces together. After a quick clean up with the linisher, the panel looks great. For that factory finished look, we're going to bend down this overhang using a slight adjuster. That's a hammer to you and me. So here it is in all its glory, the finished bulkhead. That was a hell of a lot of work, but the effort was worth it. It really does look terrific.
Apart from putting a few holes through it for some niceties like a steering column, some master cylinders, a wiring loom, a heater, the front bulkhead is done. I also need to fill in these inner wings, but I don't want to do that yet because they're providing some important access. I've also got to fit the scuttle panel, but that needs to line up with the rest of the front end panels, and getting the panel gaps right around the car starts at the back. So the next thing is to concentrate on getting the rest of the structure of the shell sorted, and that means we're going back to the back. We're back to dealing with rust again. Still, it's nothing that another £500 worth of heritage panels won't sort.
Quit your moaning and get your wallet out. Someone call a paramedic, quick!
The first job then is to temporarily reinstate the rear seat back. To do that, we need to take the angle grinder to it and get it to clear all of these chassis members we've put in. If we can get that in, we can get some idea of whether or not we can keep the rear seat in its standard position. This is a job made a lot easier by the fact that Richard's already done it, bless him. I have removed the blood from the panel.
Cheeky git. While my grinding skills aren't up to his standards, I didn't nearly cut my finger off. No wait, I did. Damn. Just for that, he can trial fit the rear seat back on his own. It's not easy, you know. I had to do it a multitude of times when cutting it out. Oh, I see. It was easy. It must have been all that fantastic cutting I did. You can see why we had to cut the seat back out, to clear the new chassis rails and the strut tops.
The good news is, with a bit of persuasion, I think we can end up with a standard looking back seat. The bad news is, we're straight into another anti-roll bar clearance issue. Happily, I've come up with a bolt-on solution to this problem, so no major re-engineering required.
These spacers drop the anti-roll bar down 25mm and back 25mm. Combine these with some extended drop links and we're golden. Okay, now to make a support plate for the seat back. This also doubles up as the anchor point for the rear seatbelt eyes and will tie into the inner arch, which is dissolved away and needs replacing. Now to skin the turrets. With the suspension and subframe gone, the rear suspension negative jig thingy is back in. The turret skin will have to follow the form of this strut top, so a CAD template is in order.
Thus.
Then a much larger template for the actual skin itself. This will be made out of 1mm steel, the kind Nick loves to bend about. After the front bulkhead malarkey, this trifling little job is nothing to him. And as we've all come to expect now, they fit perfectly. I don't know how he does it for the money, to be honest. Especially as he's doing this for fun. Well, at least that's how it started anyway. So that's the new strut towers finished, primed and looking resplendent. But those inner wheel arches are looking decidedly tatty. Replacing these would be a whole hell of a lot easier if some lunatic hadn't just put a dirty great big turret in the middle of them.
Now I've welded in the rear strut towers, the next job is to have a look at replacing what's left of the inner rear wheel arches. And if you've got one of these, it's a straightforward enough job. Unless, of course, some idiot's just welded a rear strut tower right in the middle of where this needs to go.
Told you so.
Still, before I can think about fitting a new one, I've got to get rid of what's left of the old one.
We know he's never shy about getting the grinder out to hack lumps out of the Mini, and this time is no exception. The rusty old inner arch is no more. It has ceased to be. We need a couple of datum points to put the new arch back into, and this one is the subframe mount support bracket, and this one is what's left of part of the companion box. Add a little temporary bracing inside the new wheel arch, so when we cut the middle third out of it, it doesn't get distorted and go all floppy and limp. Because floppy and limp is no use to anyone.
If you think I've lost the plot now, wait until I tub them.
Right, so all that's left to do is clamp it in position using as many clamps as humanly possible, and then weld it to the car. And what you're left with is a shiny new inner wheel arch with no tin worm. Just rinse and repeat on the other side. The last 2 months hard graft has seen us complete the huge job of making a new bulkhead, and now we're making progress on the rear end. The shell fabrication is nearing completion, so next time we should finish the shell and have it repanelled. I reckon that's enough for this episode. It's time for a brew. Be sure to tune in next time for another exciting episode from the files of Project Binky.
That'll do.
Nothing here. Sorry. We deliberately wasted your time.